Record. There we go. Alrighty. All done. Thank you, guys.
Venerable Ravina is, for those who haven't met her, if any there be, is a fantastic teacher. She's been a nun for over 40 years with the FBMT. She's well known for having started the Liberation Prison Project, which is a project that helps people who are in prison, who want to have some contact with the Buddha Dharma. Venerable Ravina has spearheaded that all along. Venerable Ravina has been foundational in starting wisdom publications, in starting Mandala magazine. She was the driving force for us to have our center here in New York. She's been the driving force for us to be back in person this week. And I feel like there's so much more that could be said. There are documentaries about Venerable Ravina's life and her work, Chasing Buddha, The Key to Freedom. She is tremendous, and I think
Tremendous.
we are
tremendous.
very lucky.
Shows Gus's good mind, doesn't it? A pure view. Listen, I wish you'd kind of move over. Otherwise I'll get quick neck. I want to see you in front of me. Listen, just come on, move your chairs around a bit. I mean, it's all right. I'm sort of half facing this way, aren't I? No, that's better. That feels better, more intimate. You can be in my lap if you like. Okay, hello people on Zoom, Lou, Alan, everybody. Happy to see you all. All right. So what we're doing, we're starting the first of these 13 modules of this program. It's been around for quite a while, called Discovering Buddhism, that dear kind Gus teaches for years now, right? You've been doing for years, isn't it? But for some reason I'm doing today's, okay? How long are your modules, 6 weeks?
It's 5 weeks plus review. So
that's fantastic, okay. So this will be the first one. And it's mind, first one, right? Mind and its potential.
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, then let's talk about that. Let's just motivate, as the lamas would say, what's your motivation? We'd say, what's our purpose? What's our goal? Why are we here together listening to this? And that includes me. I always say that. It's really true. I'm talking, but I promise I'm listening. Why? So we can take some tools from it. I mean, there might be 1% that is useful to you. We'll take that 1% and put it into practice. That's the point. Because this is advice, you know. Advice to do what? Well, first to help us develop our own amazing potential, so we can help others develop theirs. The two wings of the bird, wisdom and compassion. It's a nice way of putting the whole, framing the whole path, you know. So think of it this way. Think of it as advice. You don't have to take it. It's not like you've got to believe something and shove it down your throat. Not like that. It is advice, but you decide if you want to take it. So listen with those ears, you know. And I'll just sing a little prayer that the second lines of which express this motivation. And the first 2 lines are for those of us who already figure we're Buddhists. So it's reiterating our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings, you know. I'll say it in Tibetan, if you know it. I think it's on your bits of paper if you want to follow along. If you're not, if you don't worry. The middle one, the one in the middle. Sangye charang soke chognam la janchu baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drubpa shog sangye charang soke chognam la janchu baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drubpa shog. And the third, I'll just say it in English, we're saying, until we're enlightened, we're going to rely upon the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, first 2 lines, second 2 lines, and in order to be of benefit, and so in order to, well, we're going to listen to these teachings so that we can become this amazing being, so we really can be of benefit to others. Thinking like that, okay. So, okay, the mind. It's not a joke to say that the mind is Buddha's expertise. It's not necessarily, it's not initially evident to us, because if we listen to Buddhism, say, packaged, you know, in the Tibetan style, way back, you know, especially our lineage back in the 14th century, or you hear Buddha's teachings from back 2,500 years ago, it's very, very different way of talking. And it takes us a while to see that the mind is Buddha's expertise, you know. You wouldn't, I mean, they don't talk like that, but we can say that with certainty. And the mind for the Buddha is actually central to everything. It's you know, I think in modern psychology, in neuroscience, mind psychology is kind of on the lowest of the totem pole, I think, because it's not a hard science. We're a bit we think it's a bit wishy-washy. We don't have much faith or confidence in the ability of mind, the subjectivity, you know. But Buddha is the absolute opposite. The more we learn about Buddhism, the more we're realizing what Buddha is actually saying is This is literally what really Buddha is saying. This is the basis of all the teachings and the basis of all practice, is that what goes on in the mind is the main source of whether we're happy or suffering. I mean, that's a bit shocking, actually. We don't believe that, frankly. We kind of can maybe think the mind plays a role, but to say it so radically is not what we think. But this is exactly what Buddha is saying. So one way of describing all of Buddhism is in terms of its being, say, a method for getting happy and stopping suffering. And that sounds good. We want that. It's also a system of extraordinary, ethics. It's definitely a system of ethics. It's fundamental to it. But curiously, it's also a method for getting wisdom and stopping ignorance. So I'm not sure we want that. I'm not sure we want to stop being ignorant. We're not sure what that means. It seems rather odd. Wisdom, not sure. Happiness, yes. Ethics, kind of boring. But happiness, yes. But what's fascinating in Buddhism, they all come together. They all come together because, and this is a surprising point, the method for getting happy is to have good ethics and to get wisdom. In fact, the real essential point is to get good wisdom, is to get wisdom and give up ignorance. Because what Buddha's saying is the extent to which our minds are caught up with nonsense, and he's absolutely saying that, and this is the fundamentals of understanding the mind and how it works. The extent to which we're caught up in ego and all its voices, like attachment and anger and fears and jealousy and depression and anxiety and low self-esteem and arrogance and you name it, simple words. Buddha does not use terms like bipolar and ADHD and OCD and ADOD or whatever they are. And I'm not being sarcastic. They're terminology we've used in the West, that's okay. But the Buddha hasn't changed really his tune in 2,500 years. He refers to these fundamental states of mind. So the extent to which we're caught up in these neurotic states of mind, for the Buddha, is the extent to which we suffer. That's it. And the extent to which we harm others. So this is where the ethics comes in. The starting point in Buddhism, entry-level grade 1 junior school, actually is living good ethics. Control the servants of the mind, which is the body and speech, which is our behavior, which is ethics. Ethics is all about behavior, what your body and speech do, And then we're really qualified then to start getting into the essence of being a Buddhist, to be your own therapist, Nami, as she puts it. It's very sweet and cute, but it's profoundly true. To be your own therapist, to become utterly familiar with the contents of your own mind, to a degree of subtlety and clarity and precision that we do not use except in neuroscience. But here we're not discussing the microscope on a brain. We're learning to develop the microscope of our own mind on the contents of the mind itself. That's being a Buddhist. Good ethics is common. A good communist, a good Christian, a good Muslim, But where you become uniquely a Buddhist is when you get to the second level of practice, like junior high school, if you like, is where you start to be your own therapist. You have to learn to know the mind. And this is where we need to study in depth. We're going into it here, and Gus for sure is going to go into more precise detail than me. I'm just going to make very broad stroke things. But learning the contents of the mind, the way the mind works is utterly fascinating. So today I'm just going to give an overview of what it is, how you divide the contents, what the contents of the mind, and the way the mind functions. We're going to discuss this very broadly. What I like to quote all the time, so delicious, is the etymology of the word Buddha, the Sanskrit word Buddha. And I think the Tibetan equivalent, although I think another word in Tibetan also has a similar meaning. But the first syllable, Bud, and this seems deceptively simple. The first syllable, Bud, implies the utter erratic, and these words are precise for the Buddha. They're shocking in our modern world, but this is exactly what Buddha is saying. This first syllable implies the utter eradication from one's mind, one's consciousness, these are synonymous broadly, of all neuroses, all limited sense of self, all this, all the sense of a neurotic, concrete, set in stone, pointable, findable, separate, bereft me. This Buddhist view of what so-called ego is, And therefore, and the voices of this sense of self, attachment to get what that I wants, panic attack when it doesn't, and all the other dramas, anxiety, arrogance, all the rest. All of these are the voices of ego, if you like. And the Buddha has found from his own direct experience, he is not a creator. He hasn't made this up. There's no such thing. He has found from his own direct experience that this stuff is not at the core of our being. Therefore can be removed. Now, I remember one woman at a course a while ago, she burst into laughter, not in a sarcastic way, but so absurdly, so shocked at how absurd that is. And that's very reasonable. There's no view like that. There's no view like that in our modern psychology. There's no view like that in neuroscience. I mean, we tried back in the 1930s cutting out bits of the brain and we turned people into vegetables. That's not cool. We know that didn't work. So it's a bizarre idea that you can rid the mind utterly of what we in our culture assume are valid, reasonable parts of a normal person. So normal that you'd be abnormal if you didn't have them. So it's very shocking to hear this. But if we want to understand Buddhism, whether we practice or not, it's another discussion. We need to understand this point. But not only can we rid the mind of all the rubbish, Buddha implies we can develop to perfection everything else in the mind. Love, compassion, wisdom, kindness, generosity, forgiveness. These words are incredibly simple and we all know them. We're intimately familiar with them, you know. So this mind is something incredibly flexible. As Lama Rinpoche says, we can mold our mind into any shape we like. So here we're talking about molding our mind to the shape of a Buddha's mind. Okay, it's going to take time. And this is what's fascinating here, because when it comes to emotional components, we really do feel we're set in stone. It's very fascinating. But do you look at this? I find this very fascinating also. We don't join the dots, you know. We know we can mold our mind into the mind of a carpenter, a musician, a mathematician, a cook. We know we have incredible systems for this. We know we can start off with completely zero knowledge in our mind about music and we can eventually turn our mind into a richly amazing musician's mind. We know that, but we do not have methods. We do not believe for 1 second that we can mold our mind into the mind of a happy, wise, content, fulfilled, glorious human being. This is exactly what Buddha is saying. It's odd because we do understand we can do that with other things, with technical, you know, intellectual, artistic pursuits. You can radically change your mind. We know that, but we do not believe we can radically change our mind emotionally. I mean, to some degree we do, and the reason is because we so completely put all the emphasis on the outside world, the objects of our mind, the outside world. Because as far as we're concerned, yes, we know to become a musician, you need good music, you need good Mr. Bach's music, you need Mr. Einstein, not Einstein, what's his name? What's the man who made the pianos? Famous. What's the name of those piano makers? Steinway. Mr. Steinway's piano, we need Mr. Bach's music, we need a good music teacher. They're external, we know that. But if you were asked, why are you a good musician, Rabina? Well, Mr. Bach's fault, and it's Mr. Steinway's fault, and it's my teacher's fault. We don't say that. Or certainly if you're a bad musician, you might blame the piano. We know we are the one who judge. We know we're the one who's in charge. We know we're a good musician because we transformed our mind. We molded our mind to the mind of a musician. We needed the piano and Mr. Bach's music and Steinway, yes, but we did the work. Well, that's what Buddha says we can do for about becoming happy and wise and content and fulfilled and beneficial to others. That the main emphasis is the mind. Yes, the outside world plays roles, but I think in our culture, we totally over-exaggerate the role of the outside world. It's a very simple way of putting it. And Buddha totally puts incredible power, and we need to learn to get confidence in that, gives the power to the mind. This is the key thing the Buddha has to offer us, you know. So if we've got this potential to be happy and stop suffering, which sounds a bit dramatic, and we've got the potential to be wise and not be ridiculous, well, then we better learn to know the mind, because the mind is the cause of it. It doesn't mean the externals don't play a role. It's clearly not true. The externals play a massive role. But Buddha's expertise is the mind. So let's look at his view of it. And whether we've heard this once or never or 1,000 times, listen as if we've never heard it before. It's really good to do that. We keep our mind fresh. So first of all, the word for the Buddha. So, okay, before we even say that, who is this person called Buddha and where did this information come from? I always quote this as well. I remember one fellow in New Zealand years ago, and he happened to be a scientist. He said, who revealed the teachings to the Buddha? A brilliant question, a perfect question. I've never been asked that question before or since. It was an excellent question because he had the assumption, of course, that Buddhism is like other religious philosophies that posits a creator. So he was shocked and everybody laughed when I said, well, would you ask Einstein who revealed the teachings about relativity to him? Of course we wouldn't say that. It's like a joke to say that, because we know perfectly well Mr. Einstein used his noggin, he used his intelligence, and he observed the workings of the world, and he came up with his own findings. Well, that exactly is Buddha, surprisingly to us. It's a real surprise to us. We can't imagine that. So what is it that Buddha's observed? This is exactly every word that is called Buddhism, and you better check because lots of rubbish is published, because we assume it's just a religion, so you can make up what you think yourself and make up what Buddha says. It's very rude. So you should check your sources carefully, which includes checking this place to make sure they invite valid people to talk. No, this is really, I mean, it's true though. It's important, isn't it? Have you done your checking? He's been around for about 49 years. He's done his checking. Good. So, okay. So why? So then what that means is that we would not, if Buddha, if it's not revelation, if the concept of karma, the concept of what the mind is, the view about bodhicitta, the view about all the contents of Buddha's philosophical model and his psychological model, if it doesn't come from revelation, it's a shock to us to get used to, because it still is a religious philosophy. There's no argument. But the Buddha's view, and as His Holiness the Dalai Lama would tell us, people in the West, the modern world, if there's anything that you hear in Buddhism that eventually you cannot prove to be true, because that's really what practice is, you prove it to be true. If you disprove it, if you prove it's not true, then you must reject the Buddha. Thank you very much, but goodbye, I'm out of here. Nothing wrong with that. That's a shock to us because we don't think of spiritual teachings like that, you know. So, but that's the fundamentals in Buddhism. Buddha might be wrong about what he says is true. This is the wisdom component, you know. So what he's saying, so the wisdom one, what that means, and this is what the job of the mind is to become in sync with reality, how things exist. This is a very abstract concept for us. We call that science, but as soon as we talk religion, we get nervous because that which is true, that which is real, it sounds like dogmatic, you know. Christians are right, the Catholics are right, the Muslims are right, and there are 47 variations of every one. We know that. So we commonly ask, well, how do I know what's true? Well, how do you know whether 1 + 1 is true or not? You need to find out. You learn math, you check up on your sources, and you learn it for yourself and you prove it. This is the approach all the way from here to Buddhahood, to the Buddha. That's not joking. So the work is tremendous. And that's a surprise to us because we don't think of religion like that. Remember that wonderful movie recently, what was it, a couple of years ago, Margin Call? Was it called Margin Call? Yeah. Or was it called? And the kid who grew up to be the crazy guy no, it wasn't Margin Call. Well, that's the other one. No, I know what it is. No. Another movie about money.
All of them.
I know, one of that fellow's books, Lewis's book, Michael Lewis's book. What's it called? I mean, never mind, I'm getting off the point now. But one kid in there is one Jewish boy, an older guy, and there's a kid. He was shocking because he tried to prove whether God was right or not. The rabbi was completely shocked. That's all I was trying to bring. The joke fell flat because I had so many other stories. But this is the point with the Buddha. If Buddha's wrong, you must, that's fine. He'll be the first to be happy about it. So this is the starting point with it. So we have to take this as a hypothesis. So every word you're going to hear every word we're going to hear in this room, we have to take as our hypothesis. Take it as a hypothesis. And where this information comes from. Okay, when I learned music from my mother, she taught me music. Okay, now where did she get it from? Her teacher. Where did they get it from? Their teacher. And you can track that back in an unbroken chain of teachers right back to Bach, isn't it? It's just like that here. And they pay enormous attention to the lineage, in the same way here. If you read a cookbook, unless the author says in the preface, this is my mum's recipes, or I stole them from Fred, the author of the book cooked those meals, did them 27 times, and then put the recipes in. We just take that for granted, don't we? But with spiritual teachings, anybody can make up what they think. You read stuff that's labeled Buddhism, we all just make up our own stuff. And we love writing books in the West. Well, you have 3 classes, you do a weekend course, and you decide you're going to write a book. I mean, there are hundreds, thousands of books in the West, So we really need to check our sources. We really need to be careful to check our sources. So the teachings I'm giving here are coming from my teachers, Lama Zopa Lama Yeshe, His Holiness Dalai Lama, and that mob, as we'd say in Australia, that holy mob. I'm just passing on this information. I've tried to do my best to study what I know. And if there are mistakes, and, that's going to be my mistakes, not theirs. So the view is, we take it as our hypothesis. That's surely the first step in any bit of knowledge you're going to learn. If you've never heard of acupuncture in your whole life, let's say 60 years ago in this town, maybe 80 years ago, you've never heard of acupuncture. The first instinct is, oh, don't be ridiculous. Then you check it a bit and you start to think, maybe it's possible. And then you start to think, well, I don't know a clue about how needles heal you. But in order to even want to study it, think about this, you've got to take it as a hypothesis. You'll be prepared to open your mind to the possibility. But the commonest thing we say in the West is, well, do I have to believe in reincarnation? We're sort of like we have to force ourselves to swallow it whole because we assume, because it's religion, you can't prove it. That's not the Buddhist view. If you can't prove it, finally, it's not true. This is absolutely clear in the Buddhist approach. In fact, when you study Buddhist philosophy, the very first, like the structure of the way that the world view in Buddhism, one of the first things you learn is the various terms that are used to refer to that which exists. Phenomenon, objective knowledge, and existent, for example, there are 3 synonyms. And the definition of an existent is that which can be cognized by mind, a valid state of mind. So it's axiomatic in Buddhism that which exists is that which can be cognized. This is shocking. So it puts the mind absolutely central. This is very shocking. In fact, you could also say, and this is not a nonsense statement, it takes us a while to see it, that the entire universe is the product of what goes on in minds, all the minds of countless sentient beings over countless lifetimes. That's a shocking concept. So, okay, what is the mind then? Well, like I said, broadly speaking, you can say it's used synonymously with the word consciousness. They're used in different contexts, First point. Second point, that's absolutely fundamental. If this can be proven to be wrong, the entirety of Buddhism collapses into a heap of incoherent nonsense. Your mind is not physical. Fundamental point, starting point. Take that as your hypothesis. Extraordinarily hard until we're advanced to prove the truth of this. But that's our hypothesis. It's a starting point. The mind is not physical. That means the mind is not the brain. It's not physical. You could say, and I always say this without insulting neuroscientists, what goes on in the brain is a physical indicator of what goes on in the mind. But based on this next point, only the grossest level of our consciousness, because the next point about the mind for the Buddhist one, and this is coming from these genius, the experiences of the genius Indian great yogis and masters and scholars and philosophers before the Buddha, your mind has got much subtler levels. Its job is to cognize. Cognize what? That which exists. And once our mind is in sync with that which exists, then we're a Buddha. And then we, have got happiness, it's the bonus. And we see things as they are. We know the minds of others. We can be a benefit, blah, 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 all of this. So mind is not physical. Mind has much subtler levels of cognition. This comes from these Indians. Well before the Buddha. As His Holiness Dalai Lama says, it was these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self. I always joke, we probably thought it was Freud 100 years ago. Yeah, we arrogant modern people, And it's only now we're really seeing the extraordinary vast body of knowledge of these genius Indians well before the Buddha as well. That he came along, he went through that system, and then he diverged in his own direction 500 years later or whatever, specifically in relation to his own direct experiential findings about the nature of self, which means really the nature of mind. They're not synonymous, but the nature of self and the nature of mind. This is Buddha's expertise. Mind is not physical. Mind has much subtler levels of cognition that do not depend upon the brain. So the level of mind that we function at, the level of mind that we discuss and explore in neuroscience is only the grosser level. That's not trying to be insulting. But that's what's marvelous, all these talks with this Holiness Dalai Lama and the scientists and people now talking and questioning their assumptions. I remember when I did a book of Lama Zopa Rinpoche's on how to help people at the time of death, which of course is a major one in Buddhism, because the logic is that the idea is the consciousness, when it dies, will carry on to another rebirth. And so the major thing at the time of death for Buddhists is to help a person die well so they can navigate this process and get another decent human life so they can keep on moving on their spiritual path, So I remember reading a book by an American medical journalist, Nick or Dick Teresi. He's a very funny fellow. But it was all about the contradictions and problems and obstacles in the business of now of cutting out organs. What's the word? I don't know what the word is for that industry. What's it called?
Transplants? Organ transplants?
I thought there was a fancy word for it. Just transplants. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. So because they're now discovering, or we know for centuries there have always been reports in all cultures about people, quote unquote, coming back to life. And of course, suddenly now that's one of the major problems they've been facing, and suddenly they're forced into now looking into their questioning their assumptions about what consciousness and what is it that carries on, what is it that dies. Suddenly people, they're ready to cut their liver out, and a damn person comes back to life. How inconvenient! I mean, the man was quite cynical about the business. Actually, he was quite about the arrogance it can kind of produce and the blah, 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 whatever. But the one I remember the one doctor in this business, he said, I can now say with certainty that consciousness is not a function of the brain. Not sure what it is, but that I can say. So it's marvelous that people are questioning now and looking and seriously looking into these things, I remember His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he joked one time in Dharamsala when he said some of his scientist friends, because he's been talking to these scientists for like 40 years, right? This mutual learning process. He joked about how his scientist friends have constructed these machines that they put onto the brains of these meditators who, once they've died, I mean, it's very common in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, especially the esoteric practitioners, they can stay in meditation well after they've stopped breathing, sometimes days and weeks. That's completely fits with the Buddhist view about the mind. And he said his scientist friends have created these machines, but he said, we only have one machine. The trouble is when one of our yogis dies in South India, by the time the machine gets from Dharamsala, the fellow's left his body, and vice versa. So they have to have more machines, he said. So it's marvelous that these discussions, serious, proper discussions with science, not just, what people think of as airy-fairy religious ideas, So mind is not physical. It's got much subtler levels of cognition. And in the long term, to get the goal of a Buddha, we absolutely need to access those subtle levels. And that's where this amazing technique that the world knows in Sanskrit as shamatha, or the kind of so-called mindfulness meditation is rooted in this marvelous, sophisticated skill of developing extraordinary subtle levels of mind through concentration, shamatha, or calm abiding in English. That'll come up in your courses, So, mind is not physical. Mind's got much subtler levels of cognition that we need to access. And the other thing that's shocking to us is that your mind, your being, who you are, in other words, the essence of who you are, not your body, your mind, your love, your compassion, your kindness, your tendency to be good at football, at murder, at killing, whatever it is in you, all your tendencies, all your thoughts and feelings and emotions and unconscious and subconscious, your mind, that this is not the handiwork of someone else. I mean, you think about it, the one thing philosophical materialists would share with creator religions is that you're the handiwork of someone else. But this, for the Buddhist view, is the wackiest thing you've ever heard. This is a shocking one because we're so absolutely convinced of this, So if you're a Christian, necessarily the essence of you called a soul comes from a creator. And if you're a philosophical materialist, the essence of you, which is who you are, comes from mummy and daddy. Of course it does. There's no other way to look because we only think it's physical. The Buddha's got a third observation, that your consciousness is your own, honey child. You get a brain and DNA and genes and chemicals and all the rest from your mummy and daddy, and you track yourself back to the monkeys and the rest for that one, no argument. But in the philosophical materialist view, there is only the physical. So sometimes it works, sometimes it fits. But, there's countless contradictions in that as far as the Buddha is concerned. So many cases where even to try to work out why, never mind, all right, we'll go into that later. The Buddhist view, the materialist view is you are only the physical. And except this doctor now questioning, it's not a function of the brain, so not sure what it is, blah, blah. Buddha doesn't use the term soul, by the way. There's no concept of like a soul or a spirit, which necessarily comes from a superior being. There's no view like that in Buddhism. So your consciousness, if it doesn't come from mummy and daddy, if it's not the handiwork of a creator, if it isn't physical itself, and it doesn't come from nothing, because everything's a product of cause and effect. This is a fundamental in Buddhism, and certainly the mind, consciousness. So think of it as like a river of mental moments. If you had perfect memory, you could track back from this second, all the thoughts and feelings of this moment. What's their main source? The very millisecond before this. And what's the main source of the very millisecond before this, of the thoughts and feelings and emotions? The previous moment. It's like links, unbroken chain of links of mental moments. And if you track it back perfectly, and this is a good meditation to do, just to conceptualize, this moment comes from where? The previous, comes from the previous. And you track it back and you're going to inexorably end up at the first second of conception, aren't you? An unbroken chain of mental moments from there up to here. Now, what about the second before conception? So if you're a Christian, you know, God put the soul in the egg and sperm. Well, if you're Jew, apparently the Jews say that God didn't put the soul there until several months later. But the Christians say that God put the soul there at the first second of conception. If you're a Jew, or if you're a materialist, you are only the egg and sperm. But if you're a Buddhist, the view in the Buddhism, and especially this is not in all views. If you go to study in a Zen monastery, you won't study this. All the sources are the same. All the Buddhist literature has been around for centuries. But it depends on where you study, where you look, what Buddhism you practice. But in the Tibetan Buddhist monastic university system, which this place is based on, anything I'm telling you here is based on that system, all the body of knowledge tracking itself back for 2,500 years, over the centuries, back to India. All this is discussed in great depth, you know. So the moment of, so the second before conception, egg was in mummy's body, daddy, you know, sperm was in daddy's body, and your consciousness came from a previous moment of itself in this unbroken chain of mental moments. I mean, it's just a conceptual idea, but we can conceptualize it. And then where did that come from? The previous moment. And the Buddhist view, and this is discussed in detail in Lama Zopa's book, How to Face Death Without Fear. And this is particularly taught in the Tibetan Buddhist, in depth in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, especially the Vajrayana, the more sophisticated level of teachings. That not more than a few weeks before that, in this unbroken chain of mental moments, clearly at a subtler level, this consciousness of yours was in another body, and before that in a previous body. And then you go, the big question we all have, the one big question we have, well, that's great, but where did I begin? We all have a question, where did I begin? Where did it begin? Where did the suffering begin? Where did the universe begin? Well, this is the part that's the biggest shock to us. Logically, Buddha says, you cannot find a beginning. If everything is the product of cause and effect, such that this moment of something has to have come from a previous something. If you have a first cause, that implies something existed that didn't have a previous cause. That for the Buddha is not viable, is not workable, cannot happen. The Christians, the Catholics, I think, when I was an old Catholic, I love my Catholic upbringing. I was in love with God. The Catholics have intense teachings, capital F, capital C, proving philosophically how you can have a first cause, because in all the creative religions, the first cause is called God, you know. But that's why the Buddha does not assert a creator. He's not being rude. First, he says it's not viable. But second, this is an interesting point. He's secondly saying, well, you don't need creating, honey. Your mind is beginningless. This is an insane idea. Even as I say it now, after all these years of saying it, you know, it just sounds, because we have an instinct that somehow there has to be a Big Bang beginning, you know. And as His Holiness said, kind of cliche, quoting, after all his talks to the scientists, Big Bang, no problem. Just not the first Big Bang, that's all. So even the universes. And so we track back everything. You track back this little piece of this clock. You're not going to find ever a point where you say, haha, before this there was nothing. You're going to get back, and you get back to the first second of the universe. And then you got to go, where did that come from? And it has to come from previous moments. So from the Buddha's point of view, the physical universe, and this is the Vajrayana model, is made of the four elements. We used to talk that way a few hundred years ago in our culture. And the minds, and there are minds. There's matter and there's minds, and that's it. You know, that's the universe. And they're both beginningless. This is the nuttiest thing, because I mean, the fact is we even to think of having one past life is like a joke to us. Like, you know, just like we make jokes about it. And the reasoning we use is because we can't remember it. Well, I'm sorry, that's very illogical. I think even this morning, if you got up at 7 o'clock, by 7:15, if you were asked to account for every second of what you thought and have done in that 15 minutes, you'd be a miserable failure. Most of us don't remember most of today. We met a few random moments in this life we remember as static kind of memories, pictures in our mind, and that's it. So it's not surprising you don't remember a past life. I mean, there's all sorts of logical reasons why we can't, until we get more advanced, in which case we can. And that's where these subtler levels of mind come in. So the Buddha's approach, the grosser level we live, and we're going to discuss this today, that we live at this very gross level of our mind, at the level of conceptuality and the level of sensory consciousness. These are like the tip of the iceberg. So eventually, as we progress on this path, through certainly starting to accomplish some decent single-pointed concentration, as they call it, samadhi, enabling ourselves to get to this subtle level. And that subtle level of consciousness, which is asleep right now, has the capacity to cognize phenomena that are subtler, like the past, like the future, like the minds of others. This is completely fits with the entire Buddhist model, you know, and this is not made up by the Buddha. This came from the previous Indian, the previous yogis before him. So this knowledge has been around for several thousand years. It's just that we in our modern culture have never heard of it. That's also, we think we invented everything, isn't it? We track ourselves back to the Greeks. Nothing wrong with the Greeks. So mind is not physical. Mind has got subtle levels of cognition. Mind is not the handiwork of anyone else. This is the one that's most shocking, especially if you're trained as a neuroscientist and you're trained as a psychotherapist. Because everyone, this is implicit in how we talk. We could spend the whole of the night, and I won't, discussing just this point. When we discuss our problems, you know, we discuss our problems, always our problems. We go to our therapist. And the first thing that we do, you go to Gus, he's a therapist. And the first thing we need to do is investigate what's happened. What happened when we look at the physical, and then we look at the events. Because naturally, if you're a philosophical materialist and you have the concept of the brain, and then we're the product of events, aren't we? Mummies and daddies and Catholic nuns who beat us and people who are kind to us, whatever. We look at those events because as far as we are concerned, we are the product of events. Now, Buddha does not argue, like I said, that events don't play a role, but the Buddha's expertise, and this even for most of us Buddhists takes enormous time to get. When Buddha's discussing the mind, he's discussing the actual subjective cognitive process itself and the various precise thousands of states of mind that make up our mind. All these different, you know, the level of conceptuality, for example, all the different thoughts we have. He's not discussing the events. He's discussing the mind. This is tremendously hard because we are addicted the way we talk, you know. I didn't ask to get born. It's not my fault. And then we know, as we look into the mind, as we look into these different states, which you're going to go into, and you're going to go into it with Gus, you know, the positive states of mind and the unhappy ones, where this is huge, you know. We think of the events. Even when we say happiness, tell me about your happiness, Rabina. Now, the Buddha's view, happiness or pleasure is a very specific state of mind. We're going to go into this. It's a specific state of mind, but we are so addicted to believing that happy feelings come from the external world that we even conflate the happy feelings with the event. Tell me about your happiness. I will tell you all about the boyfriend. I'll tell you all about the cake. I'll tell you all about the concert. I'll tell you about the rainbow. I will describe the physical, external, out there event as if that were the happiness. So not only, and this is where we start to go into now, where we look in the neurotic states of mind, the one that causes so much suffering, and the key one is called attachment. Attachment, you know, is the object of attachment, let's say the chocolate cake. We are so convinced, one, that the object of that the chocolate cake is the cause of happiness. Attachment causes it, makes it look like that. And we even believe it's the happiness itself. So we're totally addicted to the external. What are memories? Memories, you know, are visual things that we have in our mind, little kind of pictures stuck in the mind from certain things that happened, things that people said, cakes, bodies, handbags. Because the external world looms large for us. So for materialists, we are the product of the external world by definition. Mummy and daddy made us. They gave us the genes and DNA, and they gave me depression and anger and love and compassion. That's our view. That's not Buddha's view. So it takes a while to hear this one. And this is what we're trying to discuss, you know. So our mind is not physical. It's got much subtler levels of cognition. It is not the handiwork of anyone else. We bring it with us. We come into this egg and sperm completely programmed with our own mind, with our own mental tendencies, with our own wish to jump on little girls from the time we can remember. or to kill, or to steal, or to play piano, or to be loving and compassionate. This is the major one. And even as a Buddhist, we've been around for 45 years, we still believe it's that mean person who made me angry, and it's not my fault and how innocent I am. Look at my anger. It's not my fault. I didn't ask to get born. It's very deep inside us. And this is the mistake that ego makes. So we have to really argue with this and to have the courage to look into the mind itself, to observe the anger itself, the love itself, the kindness itself, and to own it as mine. This is a key implication of this view of mind coming from before, and then indeed of the law of karma, which we'll touch on here, but of course is coming later in another module. It's the law that runs the universe as far as Buddha is concerned. So it's a radically different model. And if we don't go through carefully looking at it, learning the technology of it, seriously looking into it in depth, drilling down, and just hear it as a bunch of cliched beliefs, we won't get far, you know. And it's not trying to be argumentative, but it's just looking at the different views and comparing them. Because we're the boss, Buddha says. We are the boss. Shockingly, we are the boss. We don't know it. We think we are really believe we're the objective, we're the victims of circumstances, you know. And the irony is this ego's view. When you're a little girl, when I was a little girl and I was angry, my mother hadn't taught me to be angry. I automatically assumed I was a victim. How dare you do that to me? I would say to my sister, and stamp and shout. It's the view of ego, actually. It's the view of ego we brought with us, this view of an innocent victim, this view that somehow, you know, I'm just plonked on this planet by some creator or some mother and father without consulting me. No one consulted me. No one asked me, would you like to be born, Rabina? They plonk you on this planet and then you're supposed to grow up and stop blaming them. I mean, I joke about this, but I mean it seriously. I know it sounds ridiculous. If literally it is true that your mother and father did create you, if let's say Buddha's completely wrong, if your mummy and daddy did literally create you, which means they are really responsible for your anger, your rage, your psychosis. I mean, how dare they make me with a wish to jump on little girls all day? How dare they do that? I really agree your mother and your father are the problem, not just the mothers, both. I'm not joking now. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's a logical deduction. But you're told by your therapist, Gus will tell me I've got to forgive my mummy. Excuse me. If she made me, no, she should be accountable. I mean, if, you know, Mr. Frankenstein, who was it who made, what are those two people called?
Dr. Frankenstein and the monster.
That's the one. He made a monster. He made a monster, didn't he? Well, you can't blame the poor monster. Bloody Mr. Frankenstein's the blame. The creator's the blame. You know, if the car doesn't work, you don't blame the car. You blame Mr. Toyota. I mean, it's like you got to blame the creator. And if mummy and daddy are the creator, you've got to blame them. I'm sorry. It's consistent, coherent. Okay, we don't want to blame God, so I can't go there. I'm not being sarcastic now. I really am not. Being very quiet, though. Am I making you nervous? I know the Italians. I remember Lama Yeshe was in Italy at his center. This is about late 70s, early 80s, visiting his friend Geshe Jampagazza, the teacher at the center there near Pisa, and he was in the hospital, and all the Italian boys were translating to Lama Yeshe all the rude words that the Italian men were saying about God. I mean, I was a Catholic. We never said one bad word about God. Not one. But they say God is a pig. I think Our Lady was a whore. They say there's even worse. And one Argentinian fellow said, oh, we're even worse than the Italians. Anyway, so this whole concept of being the product of an external thing, of an external creator or a parent, same illogic for the Buddha. They did give me a body, that we're not arguing with. But they did not give you your mind, baby. This is the point the Buddha is making. And it's a very shocking one because we're so completely assume, even if you don't learn science, we assume we're an innocent victim. This is the irony of ego. It's kind of fascinating. It's very fascinating, really. So mind is not physical. Mind goes to subtle levels. Mind is not the handiwork of mummy and daddy or creator. And mind has this insane potential to be fully rid of all the rubbish and fully developed in all the goodness, which sounds simple enough, but when you hear the qualities of a Buddha, which you'll do in one of the modules, it's like science fiction completely, you know, but it's all there in the literature. So Buddha's view of the potential we have, even if you can't imagine you've got the potential to become a Buddha, don't worry about that. The very fact that we've got potential to not be set in stone and to change, that's radical enough, I tell you. Because again, it doesn't matter whether you study science or not. That now they're saying the greatest finding of the 20th century, one scientist said, that we're not, that we're not set in stone. There's neuroplasticity. I mean, that's already radical for us. Buddha's been quietly telling us for 2,500 years, we're not stuck with the brain we're born with, not stuck with the mind we're born with. So it's encouraging, because look at the way we suffer. The way we suffer is in the sense of hopelessness. I am no good. Look how we define ourselves, and we define ourselves by our negativity. I haven't met anybody who defines themselves in terms of their goodness. Then if you're mainly good and you've really worked on your mind, then you're humble enough and you don't define yourself as anything. You're okay. You're kind of a movable feast. But if we're stuck in stone, we're stuck in misery by definition. And we define ourselves. I'm fat, I'm thin, I'm ugly, I'm this, I'm angry, I'm jealous, I'm depressed. I am a depressed person. We define ourselves in these terms. This is the tragedy. This is why we despair, because we think we can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, because we feel instinctively that this is who I am and everything's hopeless. But look at the despair. Look at the despair in our culture. So even thinking about and listening to, analyzing, studying this Buddhist view of the mind and how it functions is very uplifting, to have some sense of confidence, that we're not set in stone. It's very powerful. Okay, so this is what we're working with at the moment. This is our hypothesis. So let's look at, there's two ways they talk about when you study the mind in more depth. And the information Gus is going to be teaching you is coming from the text that's studied in the monasteries. It's called Lorig, Mind and Awareness. And there's two main ways they present the mind. One is, and this is really kind of fascinating, it's the epistemological model, the way mind functions. And remember, we're not discussing the brain. This knowledge is coming well before the Buddha from these Indians. My feeling is that modern scientists would blow their minds to study this way that the mind works. It's incredibly sophisticated, incredibly subtle, incredibly fascinating. And again, where does this knowledge come from? Not from the microscope on a brain, but from the subtler microscope of your own mind, observing in subtle concentration the mind itself. This is utterly unknown in our culture with respect to us, not being rude, just pointing it out. And it's still existing, living knowledge, practiced continuously since 3,000 years, It's pretty amazing. So we'll begin to touch on that one. Already that's fascinating, the epistemological model. Just touch briefly on that. And then there's a psychological model, which we're going to focus on, which is the contents of our mind, the names of the different states of mind. This is what we're going to be discussing through the module, So the first one is fascinating. I'll just touch briefly on that. And this is already really telling. The Buddhist approach all the time talks about we've got body, speech, and mind. Now we know that, but we don't think this way. We don't think like this. We don't make these divisions. We just think of this one big lump of me plodding through life, But the Buddhist view is in terms of practice, the very first level of practice, entry level, grade 1 junior school, which is the whole level of practicing good ethics. That's all about the body and the speech. That's behavior, isn't it? What we do and say that impacts upon the world. I mean, look at the world. What does harm body and speech? I mean, look at the harm of the bodies. Look at wars. We might not go around raping and killing too many people in this room, but look at our speech. Utterly uncontrolled. And we actually think it doesn't matter. We actually think there are no consequences to oneself or others of what we say. I'm allowed to say what we like, we say. We say I'm allowed to think what we like. So we've got this nihilistic view about our body, our speech, and our mind. As long as we don't get caught, then we feel we're okay. I mean, it's kind of schizophrenic for the Buddhist view. Because the Buddhist view, this is karma, just touching upon it here, is this natural law that runs the universe that Buddha has observed to be true, is it such that every living being, and there are trillions of them, humans are a tiny percentage of all the sentient beings. This is another whole discussion in Buddhism. There are trillions upon trillions of sentient beings, and the word in Tibetan is very delicious, sem chen, mind possessors. All those trillions of mind possessors. Humans are a tiny percentage. All these minds are beginningless and endless, by the way. Some of the Buddhist teachings would say, no, your mind does end. There's different discussions. But the view we're having here, according to the Prasangika Madhyamika view, is the mind is endless and beginningless, as nutty as it sounds. That all these countless minds, what was I saying? I forget. Semchen, yeah, before that. What came before Semchen? Huh? What?
The subtler levels of mind.
Who?
The subtle levels of perception.
Okay, yeah. I just got distracted by the Semchen one. I distracted myself.
You're saying there are trillions and trillions.
Okay, trillions and trillions of consciousnesses, yeah, all beginnings and endless. And yeah, I'm gone blank. It's okay, doesn't matter. What?
Body speaking.
Oh, yeah, body, thank you. Body, speech, and mind. Thank you, thank you. Well done. Yogesh. He's a scientist. He keeps on track. He's a computer scientist, a genius inventor. Now I'm showing you off, Yogesh. He is though. Okay, so yes, body, speech, and mind. But so the very first level of practice, don't even worry about your mind yet. That's high school. The very first level, as Buddha says, please, honey child, control your body and control your speech. Or as Amazova calls them, the slaves. We can say the slaves of our mind. And what are they? The speech and the body. It's tremendous when we can start to understand this. So don't worry about your mind too much. We're dealing with the mind here. But your mind it's more advanced to work on your mind. And this is our major tragedy, because we're not conscious of our mind. We're completely unconscious of what our body and speech does. But they're just the servants of the mind. They've got power because they destroy or they benefit, one or the other. So the beginning stages of practice is learn to have good ethics, learn to be disciplined, control your body, control your speech. It's really logical. Then you've got the miracle of space now, because you've harnessed your crazy energy. And we can spend all our lives doing this. I mean, this has been one of my major problems, my behavior in my life, you know. I mean, Lama Yeshe at one point, I was feeling all self-piteous. I said, I'm getting better, aren't I, Lama? He said, nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with your heart, dear. It's just your behavior. And it was a revelation to me, you know. Oh, but the main one I thought was, oh, I'm okay. Because, you know, when you're a naughty girl, you think, oh, I'm bad. Suddenly I realized, he said, nothing wrong with your heart. It's just your behavior. It was a revelation to me, I tell you. And this is the first level of practice. It's a surprise to hear this, because we're addicted to meditation, you know. I want to meditate. Well, if you could have got berserk body and berserk speech, I mean, look at us. We can't even control our speech in one day. We're constantly regretting what we just said to our mother or our sister because we haven't bothered to think that that's a practice. Zip your lip, please. It's a powerful practice. Then you've got the space to see your mind. It's a revelation when you can understand it, you know. Body and speech first. It's powerful. So anyway, here we're discussing the mind. So let's look at this epistemological model. It is utterly, even this bit is fascinating. And this is really telling because it's pointing to the Buddhist whole approach about how everything comes from the mind. That's such a cliched statement, but it's a literal truth for the Buddha. Okay, so we've got sensory consciousness and we have mental consciousness. This is the epistemological model. We have sensory consciousness and we have mental consciousness in the mind. So what's the difference? Okay, it's really clear. I can't see well without my glasses. I can't even see the glasses.
2 minutes to 8.
Oh, how are we going for time?
We have until 9.
Until 9. Okay, good. Okay, let's just say though, no, this one's better. I'll pick up this mug. Hang on. And I will tell you, even with my glasses off, I will say that's a really nice, that's a really pretty mug. I would say that. Okay. So naturally, I've done this countless times. Okay. The people on Zoom know me. So naturally, without question, we will assume, won't we, that my eyes are seeing a pretty cup. We won't question that. Well, that's a load of nonsense, the Buddha says. What's happening is this. You've got your 5 sensory consciousnesses. spelling it out. And we're not discussing the eyeball. We're discussing that part of your mind, which is not physical, that functions through the medium of a decent working eyeball, nerves, the eyelid open, the lights are on, all the conditions come together so you can have a cognition of your eye consciousness. And the mind, there's many ways they talk about the mind. And one lovely, Lama Yeshe's book, Mahamudra, talks about the way mind functions like a mirror. It's a whole nother discussion. But the mind, and they always refer to the mind as subject. So my mind cognizes, and by definition, it needs something to cognize. So the sensory consciousnesses are profoundly limited in their capacity for cognition. Each of our five senses, for example, has various phenomena or objects that it can cognize. So the objects of eye consciousness are precisely two: shape and color. You can't work out the color. You don't know what the shape is called. You just have the bare cognition of shape and color. So that's what eye consciousness is actually cognizing. But so then we got to ask the question, what part of my mind then is cognizing a pretty cup? Well, what happens is, I always say this, and it's true, what happens is, because of our countless eons of lifetimes of habit, totally programmed, what happens is, quicker than Google, Lama Yeshe said, when you've got single point of concentration, he said this in Mahamudra, it's as if you can see every atom of the universe, and it's much more brilliant and more skillful and more clever than any scientific instrument. And that's not a joke. This is the view of the mind in the Buddhist view, coming from these Indians, from their own experience of having accomplished samadhi. So that quicker than Google, what will happen is my mental consciousness is accessed. And as Lama Zopa says, that's where the workshop is. That's where all the thoughts, the thousands of thoughts, opinions, viewpoints. A thought is a viewpoint, an opinion, an idea. There are millions of them. And where do they come from? Practicing throughout this life. Me working out what I think is nice design and thing, ugly this, beautiful that, he this, she that. So quicker than Google, my mental consciousness is accessed. And out of my mouth, without a millisecond in between the looking and the mouth, oh, what a pretty cup, you know. Now, if you think of this, this should blow our mind immediately, because what do you think? What is it? What part of us is connected with the universe? The senses. They're the interface between us and the universe. And what comes out of our mouth every second is an opinion about what we see and hear and taste and touch and smell, right? And we assume we're seeing ugly Fred, divine Yogesh, disgusting cup, beautiful this horrible something. We live in opinions and we believe that they are a characteristic of the thing we're seeing. And the entirety of the Buddhist view of wisdom is we've got to start to analyze and break down that process. But we are making up stories. We are making, and we believe them for so long and we become programmed in this life with them, you know. We call them instinct. You just naturally don't like chocolate. You naturally do like girls. You naturally, since a little tiny child, want to jump on, want to slaughter an ant. All these habits, which is the view of karma, they come in, we come born with all these programmed habits. And then whatever the habits are, we see them as good. They appear divine to us. And then we believe the story. This is what Buddha means by stuck in samsara. So this process of unpacking and unraveling and deconstructing all these conceptual stories, all these viewpoints about the universe we experience is the job of being a Buddhist, to discover what is the hell is real and what is not. It's an intense job and it's a delicious job. We should be delighted to do it because we want to be happy, if for no other reason. Because why we suffer is because we believe in the garbage. And why we are happy because we've gotten rid of the garbage and we're now to some degree even in touch with reality. That's the source of happiness for the Buddha. So then now that's just this one aspect about the epistemological model, how it functions, sensory and mental, and the radical difference between the sensory and the mental. And as Lama Yeshe says, we make the body the boss. We know this. I mean, not only do we think we are only the body, but we are vividly conscious every millisecond of our physical experiences, and we spend our lives adjusting them because we assume they are happiness and suffering. It's very fascinating. So now let's look at this psychological model, the contents of this mental consciousness. And so now there's two levels at which that can function. The subtler one, and they call that literally, in Buddhist psychology, that's called literally perception. And that in the mental consciousness is a subtler level of mind. You only have that when you get the samadhi. So forget that. Although it's a regular English word, it's got a specific definition in Buddhist psychology. It's a subtler level of mental consciousness where there's no intermediary in the mind. It's a direct knowledge. And that's very abstract for us because we don't have an equivalent in modern psychology. But then then there's the grosser level, and this is the level we function at. And that's called conceptuality. Now, that's a shock to us. In our world, we think up here, conceptuality is like intelligence and all the thoughts about music and cooking. And then you've got this one here. This is the one that runs the universe. And this is called emotions. But the Buddha's view is they are all conceptually based. They're all based on thoughts. This is a shock. When we can start to understand this, and you're going to unpack this with Gus, when you realize all your emotions, like anger, love, they're rooted in being conceptual stories. And we will never find this to be true until we start drilling down beyond the physical, beyond the emotional. And that's the key job that Buddha's offering us the skill, to do, to get to a subtler level of our mind. And don't think that's mystical, to go beyond the physical and the emotional. And one of our main tragedies in our culture, we don't know what our mind is doing until the body feels it, because we're addicted to our bodies, Now, there's a method, and this is including in Buddhism, to become familiar with your mind by first becoming familiar with your body. There's no doubt. But the fact here is we do not, and this is our tragedy in our culture, we don't go to the therapist. I won't go to Gus one day because I feel a bit annoyed because I broke the cup while I was washing the dishes. He'll tell me to shut up and go home and wait, I want to kill my husband. He doesn't want to know about my annoyance. It's just too pathetic. We only deal with dramas in modern psychology. Otherwise, we wait till you go mad, kill yourself or someone else before you go to your therapist, because we feel so guilty anyway. But the Buddhist approach is we've got to see what's going on in the mind before it gets to the physical, before it gets to the emotional. This is what's hard. This is what's incredibly hard. But this is the great skill. Forget Buddhahood, forget nirvana. But just to be able to start to be aware of what the hell is going on beneath the body, beneath the emotions. That's the skill we can take from Buddhism. You can be a communist and do this. It's not religion. It's just common sense, I tell you. But it demands a lot of rigor, a lot of good intention, a lot of authenticity, a lot of courage, because we don't want to look at our minds. We'd rather blame the outside world. And that includes for our happiness, Well, why are you happy, Rabina? Oh, Gus is so kind to me. Why are you unhappy, Rabina? Oh, Gus is so mean to me. So we even blame people for making us happy because we assume it's the outside. No, they play a role, but they're only a catalyst. The mind is the main one. This is what Buddha's telling us. So now, okay, ask me some questions before we go on to more detail. I want to go into some detail about the contents of the mental consciousness, the way they're divided, the states of mind. Then you're going to unpack all this with Gus in the next few weeks. But before that, are there any questions, terms, definitions, clarity about terminology or anything? No one on Zoom? Yes, sweetheart, go.
I'm wondering if you're trying to observe the mind. What is observing the mind?
Parts of the mind. We'll go into that. That's not complicated. It sounds complicated, but the mind, like everything, okay, I'm holding a cup. It's true, isn't it? So let's be more precise. Which part of I? Well, my hand. Which part of my hand? The thumb, the pinky, each bit. So everything is made of bits and pieces. And you want to drill down, you're going to see each bit and the job it does, isn't it? That's being precise. Same with your mind. Mind too is made of many parts. It's got millions of thoughts. So which part of my mind is watching other parts of my mind? So this is what we're going to go to in a minute, into the contents of the mental content. We'll go into that. Okay. Do you with the general point, you're clear?
Yes.
Bits of your mind doing their job, all doing their job, Yes.
So I have a question.
Yes.
And my question is that, so the point of suffering is to get rid of attachment. So when we get rid of attachment, our mind can feel more open and be not binded anymore.
That's a good, yeah, we're going to go into that. Exactly. That's not a bad statement. Yes. Buddha would be telling us that's true. Let's go into that and unpack it a bit. Yeah.
Okay.
Shall we do that? Is that our Peter, is it?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
darling, we'll start. You're just about You're just about getting on track for me. I'm about to go into this now.
Because
Okay.
I get carried away with suffering into these deep emotions when I'm meditating. But now I'm trying to understand, maybe this is the path that's going to make me not attached.
Well done,
to-
darling. Let's go into it. We'll go into describing a little bit these states of mind, and then you can start to hear that, and then we can discuss it. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
darling. Thank you. Very kind. Yes.
Do you have any specific challenges with attachment still?
Let's go into it. Let's discuss it. You mean me personally?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I'm riddled with it. Come on. But I mean, put it this way. I think when we understand the depths to which attachment goes, we're going to discuss it now. As Lama Yeshe said, I can tell you about it for a whole year and you will never begin to understand it because it's levels of subtlety that we do not even begin to contemplate. So it's got unbelievably subtle levels. So I think it's until you've realized emptiness, really, you're still going to have attachment. So it's a highly evolved state. And this is our Peter's point, and we almost can't conceptualize the possibility of it in our culture. So but the thing is, as you progress, knowing your mind a bit more, and you're harnessing your body and speech, and therefore beginning to harness your mind, and slowly, it has less and less power for you. Of course it does, but the subtle levels of it are pretty primordial. And we're going to go into this. We're going to this, yeah. But you can learn to also navigate it more. And even indeed on the Mahayana path, you can even use it more. You can be kind of the skillful ways of working with it. Do you understand? Yeah.
Completely.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Go, darling. Yes, go, darling.
So what are dreams? Like when you wake up in
Okay, this is, okay. In the Vajrayana model, which is the kind of more, another word for that is Tantra. The Tantrayana model, which is really still the major, is only really among Tibetan Buddhists. They brought it from India with them. You've got the way they describe us in terms of our mind. We've got gross consciousness, which is the sensory, and that's linked to this gross body. So there's utterly inextricably linked, gross body and gross consciousness. Then this is also described in the death process. So as you gradually deconstruct those components, by the time you stop breathing, your gross consciousness and your gross body have ceased. And that's what people call death, but you're not dead yet for the Buddhist one. Your subtle consciousness, which is actually your mental states, they are subtle. We access them in the grosser level day to day, but they've got a subtler component. So they've got this subtle physical energy as well that's linked to that. It's completely different from our model. And it's a bit similar to the Chinese one, similar to the Ayurvedic one. They talk about, we've got this subtle physical energy, subtle wind energies or prana. They talk about this in yoga, and that's inextricably linked, that physical energy, with our subtler states of mind. So you go to your Tibetan doctor and she'll feel your pulses, which is your wind energies, going through all your different channels. And she will recognize, that particular wind energy is utterly linked to your attachment, which is why you're having panic attacks and anxiety. So they're all utterly linked. And that's your subtle mind is what plays out in dreams, because your senses have ceased, but your subtle mind, your mental states, and they're mostly uncontrolled for us. But I mean, in this Vajrayana system, you can learn to get incredible control over all of this and learn to be aware of your subtle mind. The greatest yogis can access their subtle mind. But that's what plays out in our dreams. And the other thing about the Buddhist view of the mind, there's not a single thing we've ever seen or heard or tasted or touched or smelt since beginning this time that isn't stored as memories in our mind. And that's why we can eventually get really incredible clairvoyance as we've subtle. So then all that plays out in dreams, the stuff that we supposedly have buried that we can't notice 90% of the time, but they're kind of sitting there as memories, and our subtle mind is more powerful and can access these experiences.
So it's more juicy stuff again with the dream.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely it is. I mean, it can, yes. But I mean, it's all we can learn to harness all of this and become aware of all of this eventually.
I wake up with information every morning.
What, sweetheart?
I wake up with information every morning.
There you go. That's
My
right.
dreams.
That's good. It's good. It's good to look at your dreams. It's good. It's good. It's you. It's your mind. It's stuff that's stored there, And sometimes people have very interesting experiences with their dreams. Sometimes very scary things too, because a lot of stuff that's suppressed, comes up in dreams, isn't it?
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so now let's look at the contents of this mental consciousness and at the level at which we function, which is the grossest level, the tip of the iceberg, the conceptual. So essentially, the Buddhist model of the mind, describes all these thousands of states of mind that we all know are there from the second we wake up until the second we go to sleep, that is raging on. This is so shocking, almost simplistic. We can divide them all into three categories. Those that are neurotic, deluded, delusional, disturbing. There's about 1 million synonyms here, that are misconceptions, that are the source of our pain, that have no basis in reality, and that run the show, unfortunately. Then you've got the valid ones: love, empathy, compassion, kindness. We all know these too. They're our saving grace. And then the third category, which is a bit to do with your question, the third category, they're called neutral, but this is confusing until we really get what Buddha means by this first lot. They call them either negative or non-virtuous, and then broadly speaking, synonymous, not really sometimes, but they're broadly speaking the neurotic, disturbing, distorted, ridiculous, unhappy states of mind that causes pain, that make us miserable and cause us to harm others. Good Lord, you know, look at the world. They're called the three of these, and they call these the three poisons. Buddha refers to the three poisons, the three toxic emotions. And all the other thousands are rooted in these three. It's like a really coherent map of the mind. It's very fascinating, the neurotic ones, the deluded ones. Now, this is the point that Buddha's making, and it's so shocking that we can get rid of these. The long-term goal is to utterly rid your mind of these. But I said, don't worry about that. Just even if you can imagine, you can learn to know them, become familiar with them, to unpack and unravel them and hear the crazy stories and learn to argue with them because they don't have a basis in reality. This is a strange view to have, but once you get to become familiar with this, it's a revelation. These are the ones that source our pain. Check the world. Why do you think people drop bombs on each other? Not because what their mother did to, for God Almighty's sake, it's because they've got anger. It's sort of kind of so obvious, it's embarrassing, but we go, oh, the mother must have hurt them, and poor Mr. Hitler, I don't know what his mother did to Mr. Hitler. I mean, excuse me being sarcastic, but you know. Okay. Then you've got the next lot, the positive ones. So when you get to begin the understanding they're non-virtuous or negative, we don't like that in psychology. It sounds like you're judging people. We don't like talking that way, but don't hear it in a moralistic way. Because you see, in Buddhism, there's no view of a creator. Therefore, there's no view of punishment and reward, because there's no one to punish you or reward you. And that's a view we have deep in our bones. We assume someone up there is watching, you know, judging, blaming, punishing. There's no view like that in Buddhism. So negative states of mind, neurotic states of mind, non-virtuous, are those that cause us pain. We should be so kind to ourselves to recognize them. Then you've got the positive ones. I mean, this is not rocket science. Check the last time you're anxious or jealous or angry. You felt terrible. And look what you did to others. You're mean to your sister. You hit the dog. Forget about your next ex-husband. Then look at the other ones. Love, compassion, empathy. This is not rocket science, but we miss it. We don't join the dots. There's more spacious. You feel open, connected to others. It's obvious. The third category, and this is what's curious to us, they're called neutral insofar as they're not negative and neurotic, and they're not virtuous and positive, but they're crucial. So I'd rather call those ones the mechanics of our mind. So this is when you start to look at the mind. So you've got what in that you've got states of mind called intention, attention, discrimination, aware, like alertness. There's one called mindfulness, which is, you know, got 47 varieties in the world, but actually it's a specific function of your mind, very specific, that enables you to bring yourself back to what you're doing because you forgot what you're doing. It's like short-term memory, basically. It's not some kind of holy state. As Amazopa says, thieves need mindfulness. A sniper needs very good attention, very good concentration, very good discrimination, otherwise you shoot the wrong person, and very good mindfulness, because if they keep getting distracted, they'll shoot the wrong person. These are the mechanics of our mind, and these are used and trained and developed in concentration meditation. So right now we're using them to do rubbish, you know. So they're neither virtuous insofar, and that's a difficult point to get. Virtuous actions produce happiness, Buddha says. It's not punishment or it's not reward, it's just a logic. And non-virtuous actions and thoughts produce suffering. But these ones enable you to do positive and negative things. They're the things that enable you to do things. They enable you to function. They're like, that's why I call them the mechanics of our mind. So it's a very specific way of talking. So there are these thousands of states of mind, and they're divided into these three categories. There's no fourth category. So our job, if our job is to rid the mind of all the neuroses, the first category, and to develop to perfection all the goodness, which is the second category, then you're using the third category to help you do it. It's a very precise job, you know. It's not discussing how we talk in the modern psychological models, like you know, they're very broad stroke kind of descriptions of events and things all joined together. These are precise terms used for the precise moments of mind, and there are or thoughts, basically. We live at the level of thoughts. So anger We think of anger is when you see a person shouting and yelling and spit coming out their mouth and they're punching and kicking. That's just their body. That's not anger. It's the servant of the anger doing violence. Anger is a mind, is the mind, and it's a conceptual story. What is anger saying? How dare you do that to me and my people? I'm going to kill you. That's anger. What's attachment? Attachment is, oh, that cake is so divine, it's going to make me completely happy. And I'll be, or Gus is the most divine being in the entire universe. And when I get Gus, I'll have happiness. Finally, I found happiness. This is attachment talking. They're conceptual states of mind. But because we are so programmed with them, they're virtually instinctive now. And then because they're so instinctive and so automatic, they trigger the physical experiences. And we only notice them when the body feels something. This is like never having heard, I use this dumb example, but it's so true. It's like never having heard of car mechanics. You have a brand new car and you drive it and drive it and drive it and drive it. And one day at 100 miles an hour, you notice the wheels are falling off. Oh, what'll I do? Well, how about catching them when they wobble? Car wheels don't fall off cars because you've heard of mechanics. We don't have methods to take care of our bloody minds. Excuse me, we say that in Australia, it's all right. Don't we? That's our tragedy. We wait till we're having extreme panic attacks. We wait till we're so depressed we can't go to bed. We wait till we want to murder somebody, and then we go to Gus. This is too shocking. I mean, how idiotic. Can you imagine never having heard of car mechanics? And we have maintenance for everything. Bodies, we have brilliant maintenance for our body. One miniature twiggle of the knee and you have a panic attack and go spend $4,000 on a doctor. Don't wait till your leg's falling off. We do that with our mind though. This is our tragedy because we're so fixated on the outside, blaming the husband, the boyfriend, the this and the that and the food and the blah, Isn't it? Do we communicate here? So knowing your mind is miraculous, and grabbing them, these thoughts that are beneath the emotions, that feed into the emotions, that are the basis of the emotions, That's the skill we have to do. Forget about nirvana and Buddhahood. This is already incredible. Then you can guarantee you can navigate your life without losing the plot. You can guarantee that. That's not a false promise. It just takes time. So the three poisons, Buddha starts off with the three poisons. This root one, they call it ignorance, which is a bit abstract, but it's this primordial, neurotic, clinging, fear-based sense of an I, so ingrained, a sense of a neurotic, separate, lonely, bereft self. It's totally instinctive, totally at the level of assumption, deep in our bones, On the basis of that one, there is its main voice, which is this emotional hunger, multifaceted, this attachment. So the most primordial level of attachment is dissatisfaction. We get born into this life from having practiced attachment with this primordial feeling of not having enough. It's the default mode. And then when it's really serious, I am not enough. This is utterly heartbreaking. So of course, if you haven't got enough, you hanker after something, which of course is out there, the objects of the senses, convinced that when I get that, it'll fill up the gaping hole. So we spend our lives pursuing the objects of the five senses. And then those that are seen through the lenses of attachment. Attachment is multifaceted, like I said. It's dissatisfaction, it's emotional hunger, it's hankering. And its key job, already it's working, is over-exaggeration of the deliciousness of the cake, the handbag, the boy, the this, the job, the event, the rainbow, whatever it is that attachment gloms onto. It over-exaggerates its deliciousness and then over-exaggerates its role in bringing me satisfaction and happiness. This runs the show. Buddha says effectively in our lives, the source of suffering. It's a shock to hear this. So keep remembering, and this is hard for us, these negative neurotic ones, they are in their nature neurotic and negative. It's not as if sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. You can use them skillfully, but in the beginning, not. You have to recognize them. The trouble is with the word attachment, that's got a different definition, how we use it in the modern world. So don't use that definition. Here, Buddha's talking about a neurotic, emotional, hungry, delusional, ridiculous, distorted, state of mind, but actually is the symptom of a very suffering person. Attachment is dissatisfaction, emotional hunger, hankering, manipulating to get it, exaggerating its deliciousness, expecting massive expectations of the happiness that will come. And then when it's a person and things, enormous possessiveness, All of that's a function of attachment. We recognize it's multifaceted. That runs the show. It's the main voice of this ego grasping, the root one. Then the millisecond this attachment doesn't get what it wants, because one way of describing attachment is this constant assumption that I only must get the good things, which means I only must get what I want. It's totally self-centered. The millisecond attachment doesn't get what I want. Panic attack, the third one, aversion. And that's multifaceted too. The volatile level of aversion is anger, shouting, yelling, screaming. Look at the world. The milder levels of aversion, and we don't even pay attention to these, they're all thwarted attachment, just a question of degree, annoyed, frustrated, irritated, upset. We say those so calmly. They are subtle versions of anger. When the thing doesn't happen the way you want it. You get the red light. You drop the cup when you're washing the dishes. The husband doesn't listen to you. The kids don't do what you want. The neighbor doesn't do the right thing. The person drives too slowly in the car. Look at the baby events throughout our day. They're the wheels wobbling, but we don't pay attention. And because nothing goes astray in our mind, it's all stored there. It all builds up until one day the straw that breaks the camel's back. And the wheels fall off at 100 miles an hour. Aversion, anger. And then finally, internalized, for some people who are quieter, despair and depression. They're all the thwarted attachment. Attachment is the main voice of this panic-stricken I, this limited sense of self. And these are all constricted, limited, unhappy, concrete, rigid, frozen in space, panic-stricken states of mind. And in our culture, we consider them normal. Normal insofar as you'd be weird if you didn't have them. So in other words, we give them all equal status, along with intention, concentration, good memory, love, compassion, and kindness. Hopefully some more of the good ones, but we don't ever, there's no view that says you can rid them utterly. There's not even hardly a view that says you can get less on them. Well, there probably is, but we don't have much confidence in it. These are the source of our pain, Buddha says. We should be heartbroken for ourselves, not guilty. These are why we suffer. So it is obvious, and we must distinguish them, because love and compassion and kindness, they're our saving grace. They're our saving grace. They're what make it happy. They're what make me happy, and then they're what make me help others be happy. So we want to grow those and lessen the other rubbish. That's it. This is the essence of the job of being a Buddhist, Surprisingly to us, we usually think it's about being mindful, watching your breath or something. I mean, watch your breath. But as Lama Zopa says, thieves need mindfulness. Nothing innately good about being mindful. You've got to do it for the right reasons, compassion and empathy and the wish to grow yourself and help others. So that's the essence. And all the other dramas come from those three, like this map of the mind, Buddha talks about something like 84,000 neurotic states of mind. And Ling Rinpoche, I mean, you saw Ling Rinpoche, did you see him when he came? Ling Rinpoche, the young one. Ling Rinpoche. Anyway, he always said, 21,000 of these 84,000 are rooted in ego, in the root delusion, ego grasping. 21,000 are rooted in attachment. 21,000 are rooted in aversion, and the other 21,000 are rooted in all three. It's like this coherent map of the mind, all based on these three. It's a very fascinating view. This is the Buddha's view. So we need, if we're trying to be Buddhists, this is the model we use. Doesn't mean you can't use Jung and Freud and all the rest as well to enhance your work. But these are fundamental. So that the habit that we have to cultivate, the first thing, and this is not being sarcastic, the first thing we do is when you see some kid who's screaming, for example, the first thing we do, what did their mother do to them? What is their situation like? They might have a lousy situation, but they might not. Remember the Columbine kids? 20 years ago, wasn't it? 20-something years ago. I remember reading the mother of one of them. She wrote her memoir 20 years later, and I was reading an interview in the New York Times a few years ago. And she said, I mean, this devastation of the suffering broke up the family. It was the most devastating experience of her life because everybody blamed the parents. They even dug up the bloody brains of these boys secretly to see what the problem was, because the parents were nice, white, Christian, good people. So it infuriates us. Who can you point the finger at? Because we don't have a view. There's something in these boys' minds that the Buddha would say brought with them that caused them to be so psychotic and crazy. You have to find someone to blame. I'm not saying the outside world doesn't play a role, but it falls down so many times when you just can't find the cause. So we throw our hands in the air, you know. The Buddha says, don't worry about what the parents did. Just look at yourself, especially. It doesn't mean you don't remember your past. It's good because it can trigger what goes on in your mind. But finally, you need to learn to see what's in your mind. Finally. I mean, I can look into my mind as a little girl and see anger. Then I go to my family. I mean, I love my family. I can see the situation. My daddy did this and my mummy did that. So you can see the events that triggered. But the thing I'm trying to concern with is the thing that it triggered, not caused. The anger was already in my mind. I brought it with me. My kindness, apparently I was generous when I was little. They're in my mind. They're the things we want to become familiar with. Nothing wrong with remembering what your daddy did and what your mummy did, but they're not the main cause. That's the simple point that Buddha's making. So it's a revelation and it's powerful. So when you see that child, don't worry about what their parents did. Just look at their mind. They're angry. They're infuriated. They've got masses of attachment, masses of anger. Yeah, their mother beat them up 10 times in a row, but some children get beaten up and have not got anger. They've got sadness instead. So the thing that's in the mind is the point to look at, ourselves and in others. Then we can begin to really help each other. You focus on the person, look at the jealousy, and not thinking we're all brand new, born as a blank slate, and then your mummy and daddy make you naughty, you know? No, you bring it with you. It's a very different view, a very interesting view, but it takes a lot of discipline to want to look into our own minds. And then when you can see your mind, you can see another person, you know, and you can help them. What do you think? What time is it? Time to go home, is it already? No? Oh, a whole half of 30 minutes. So question time, come on. I'll leave Gus to go into the details. I'm just trying to make the general points about the approach, you know. So are there any questions, please?
Well, I'm just wondering if you could speak on how all of this accumulation of causes and conditions.
I'm sorry, do you mind taking your mask off, John, so I can hear?
How is this not fatalistic? And
Which
how
pit?
can we
Which pit?
purify it?
Okay,
This
which bit?
Karma, all of this that we bring. with
Oh,
us.
okay. I see. So fatalistic means if there's a cause, somehow you're stuck with it. Well, a rose seed will only bring a rose. Is that fatalistic? You're saying it is, basically. You're saying that, but see, that's the interesting point. We understand cause and effect with roses and flowers. We have to know rigorously, you have to learn precisely all the botany rules. You have to know what a seed is, and you know that seed will always bring a rose. It won't just bring a peanut sometimes. So is that fatalistic? No, it's called logic. 1 + 1 is always 2. It's just logic. It's not fatalistic, but because we have an assumption that we're born innocent. We have an assumption that we're produced by the external world. They're the assumptions in our bones, I think. And that's what why we ask the question as soon as we hear there are causes, we assume it's fatalistic. I mean, you know, for example, if you are a brilliant gardener and you've got this plot of land and you've sown a bunch of seeds in it, and then I look at this ground and I just see this barren ground. And then I know nothing about botany, meaning I've never heard of the law of cause and effect, okay? And you know, you can proceed to describe to me exactly how your garden will look in 10 years. You know you can do that, can't you? If you've got a plan on a piece of paper of a 10-story building, you know you can exactly tell me down to the last screw how it will look when it's built. No one's, you know, but I don't say, oh, wow, Kim, you're clairvoyant. You'll say, no, I just know the laws of nature. But we're used to that when it comes to that, but not with the person. Do you see? So the things, you can pull those plants out anytime you'd like. You can pull the building down anytime you'd like. But laws are laws. And if you obey the laws, you can predict the future. Nothing surprising. But we assume, first of all, there's a creator who keeps his plan in his pocket. I'm not being rude. And it would be presumptuous to assume you know what God's damn plan is. That's the rudest thing possible. That's why we have faith in him. That's one view we're coming from. So all life is a mystery. because we are not supposed to know it. That's the view of the creator. Buddha disagrees. Or we have the view that it's materialism and nobody knows why things happen. So we've got these two views blooming at us. This is the third one. It's not fatalism, it's logic of cause and effect. And we can be in charge of it. So you can predict exactly your garden, and you can predict exactly what actions you do that will produce the future. The Buddhist view of karma is, if you know karma well enough, even roughly, you can look at your body and your life and you can tick the boxes. Why Kim has got this kind of body is because of that action. Why she's got money in the bank is because of her generosity. Why people believe her words is because she hasn't told lies. Why she's got grey hair here is because of this and that. You can do that with this law, if it's a natural law, if it's a logical, coherent law. Which is shocking to us to know that there is a law, because it's either God who's got it and he keeps his plan quiet, or we don't know yet. They're the two extremes we've got, aren't they? This is a third option. Are we communicating?
Yes.
We've got to look into it, honey. We've got to study. It's all in the bloody books for thousands of years. I'm sorry, I'm being very Australian tonight. Must be her fault. It's Australian person out there. Are we communicating? I mean, this is radical, because we usually don't dig it this deep, you know? This is the logical consequence. If we have this view, that if it is true, if it is a natural law, as His Holiness says, karma is self-creation and we do it. So we better learn this law damn quickly and start working with it and getting the garden we want. And if there isn't a law, then it's potluck. That for me is not viable. What do you think?
I think, well, I was talking with Rowena before this about how it's hard for many people I know to understand cause and effect. Just
Can
in
you
the
take the
smallest
mask?
ways.
It's really hard to hear you,
Oh,
darling.
sorry, Rowena. That it's hard to understand just cause and effect in the simplest ways.
Of course it is.
You know,
That's right.
and so I was thinking that also it's hard to think or to believe or to accept,
Or to take as your hypothesis,
to take as your hypothesis,
a work in progress.
all of your joys, all of your sorrows are the result of
That's
all
right.
of these past actions.
But it's only because we haven't heard it before, surely. I mean, if you've never heard of acupuncture and you've been an allopathic person for a couple of 100 years in your village, it sounds a ridiculous nonsense to talk about needles healing you, because it's a completely another language. I mean, it's just because our minds are small and we're stuck in our ways, darling. I mean, if something is worth looking at, we've got to have a really open mind and decide we're going to look into it and see if, and this is a really important point, to see if even first it's coherent theoretically, which is why we have to study. So, you know, my feeling is if something like acupuncture is valid, is a valid body of knowledge, not just a random cross your fingers mystical rubbish, that it's a valid body of knowledge. If it is, it has to be coherent first intellectually. Buddhism the same. We don't think of religion like that. If it's not valid, if it's not theoretically coherent, it's a load of rubbish. Musical is music. All the sciences that we know are intellectually coherent. Math, engineering, architecture, music, and we are geniuses at this, and we love it. And you have to start as your working hypothesis before you start adding up 1 + 1 is 2. Because we all think this way, and then we suddenly think karma, load of intellectual nonsense, mystique, blah, 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 blah. But the real problem is ego's view is the opposite of karma. This is what Buddha's telling us. Ego's view is everything is static, everything's set in stone, everything is absolute, everything is mystical, everything's nihilistic. That's the view of ego, which is the real reason we can't hear karma. We've got mighty resistance to it because the view we have already is a load of rubbish, already in our bones. That's the big obstacle.
Yeah.
Do you understand?
That's what I was thinking.
That's
There's
right.
a lot of nihilism and self-loathing.
Mass, and that's the irony of ego. Why we think we're creeps, we kill ourselves, we can't see the light at the end of the tunnel because we're running like from pillar to post, like we're bipolar. Suddenly everything's blissful. I'm in heaven, everything's perfect. Then you crash to despair. We're up and down like yo-yos. That's ego, and we're programmed with that for countless lifetimes. Even as a hypothesis, that's kind of tasty. Yeah. Yes.
Follow, and maybe it's a tangent. Feel free.
So never mind.
But the notion of karma, right, and the seeds of the garden and planting makes total sense, and you can change your karma by you taking different action. what's a way to think about sort of the purifying past karma, like going backward? Is that?
Well, that's, I mean, if you know botany that well, you keep going back deep, you drill down and know more sophisticatedly exactly what's in the garden, exactly why this thing happened. You know all about the weather and this one and that size and the sun coming up at this time. You know more and more skillfully how to work with these laws of botany. You know how to avoid things, how to fix things, don't you? I mean, it's just knowledge.
Yeah.
I mean, if our minds are beginningless, we've got billions of karmic seeds and there's nothing we've ever done or said and thought that hasn't stowed a seed, there's bucket loads of things that are sitting there waiting, latent, waiting to ripen, then part of the job is definitely to put atomic bombs under that negativity. And as I mean, we do this practice, you know, as Lama Zopa says, we're insane not to do the practice every day. But as Lama Yesi said, you know, it's the mind that does it all. So he says, as Lama Yesi said, it's the mind that creates negativity and leaves these impressions and these programming in the mind, but it's the mind that transforms it by being positive. So it's not like a mystical thing. And the more sophisticatedly we can know these laws, the more we can work with it and make sure we, you know.
Even if it's like happened in the past.
What?
Even
But
if
I mean, but that's the point I'm talking about. Because the thing is, the Buddhist view is you plant seeds, everything you think and do and say, they will just stay there and start doing their thing if you allow them to grow. But you don't want to allow them to grow. You want to get rid of them first. So you've got to put atomic bombs onto them. They won't just disappear. Do you understand?
Yeah.
Yes, Nick, yeah.
Is it fair to say that purifying karma isn't really going back to the past, it's using the past as a reference point, but more like you're creating new causes to counteract the old?
No, it's true. No, it's a good way to put it. Yeah, you're putting, I mean, by having, like, say, when we do the practice and you recognize you've got this old tendency to be angry, let's say, and, you know, you've got these angry tenders and you came born with it from past tendencies. So it's by having a conscious thought, I am sick of this anger, I'm sick of the pain, and I want to have, and I have compassion for those I've harmed, and then I imagine purifying it. That's the present action, but it's like it's putting atomic bombs under the habit. That's what it's like. Exactly. It's the present. Using, I mean, it is the present. So using the analogy of seeds, it would put atomic bombs under those seeds so they don't have much chance to ripen because you just put new ones in, if you like. It's a good way to put it, Nick. It's true. It's all the mind, though. These analogies of seeds and fruits, and this is just, it's just the mind, you know. Yeah, it's interesting. Someone else.
You have several online.
This is 3 hands on here. Hello, Rebecca. Hello, Elaine, and hello, Linda. Rebecca first. Speak to me.
Hi. I was wondering if you could talk, I've heard it about the fierce compassion when you're upset and angry because not like globally, but say somebody's in a hospital room and they're being rude to a nurse and you get angry because you, on behalf of that nurse, like, could you talk a little bit about that and like how those seeds work and how to view emptiness when the aversion is not about you?
Forget emptiness, darling. This is really quite, I mean, it's kind of complex, but let's keep it simple. Okay. So, okay. So here we are, here you are, you've got compassion. You see someone being hurt and you have compassion, right? You have compassion for the nurse. Do we agree? Is that true? That's a positive quality. That's wonderful. But look what happened to it. Because you have also got attachment and your attachment only wants everything to be lovely. And how dare this wretched rude person in the bed upset your equilibrium by being mean to this. You then have attachment and then you get angry because your attachment didn't get what it wanted. And that you confuse it with your compassion. So there's a mixture of things. If you had only, let's say you're a highly advanced being with no attachment and anger, you'd have incredible compassion for the nurse and you'd show her affection. But you know what? You'd have even more compassion for the mean woman in the bed because she just started some negative karma. It's a bit like a mother for her child who's a pedophile. Pedophiles have mummies, you know, and the only one who has compassion for the pedophile is the mummy because she knows he's harming himself. That's the real one of compassion. You'd have compassion for the nurse and you'd smile at her and she would be glad that you can see her. You'd be happy, but you wouldn't be angry and you'd have compassion even for the woman. But you might be firm with her nevertheless because compassion can be tough love. You might even say that's not a very nice thing to say to that nurse. She's being so kind to you, but it would come out of compassion for the woman, not anger, if you didn't have attachment. So, join the club.
Thank you.
Do you understand?
I do. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Elaine.
So can we go back to you talking about there not being a concept of reward and punishment?
Yes.
How do the Buddhist hells, the naraks, fit into that?
Oh, totally reasonable, darling. I mean, the concept we have is that there's God or mummy or the judge or somebody who brandishes this, weapon. And when you're found to be naughty, they punish you. That's the usual view of ego that we have. So when we hear karma, we hear it in just the same way. But the Buddha's telling us we create our own suffering. We create our own hell realms. As Lama Yeshe said, the hells aren't some place where the devil is waiting, saying, ha ha, I'm waiting for Lama Yeshe. It is the manifestation of the negative energy of that unbearably suffering being.
Okay. Because there's supposed to be
happiness is the same. Happiness is the same, but we only ask about karma when it comes to the unhappy stuff. But every second, anything good happens in your life. Any second, you feel good, you have a nice meal. Every one of those is the fruit of one of your virtues. We should be weeping in joy at our past hard gardening every time we look at the roses and the flowers and the veggies in our garden, and your life is your garden. You would never forget the hard work that you created in your past virtue, your kindness, your non-lying, your non-stealing. In every second of goodness that arises in your life is the fruit in your garden of seeds you planted. We forget the good. We only have panic attacks about the bad, but they're all the manifestation. As Lama Zopa says, they're all your own karmic appearance. Everything we experience is the fruit of our own past actions. So if you walk down the street and a dog does caca on you, that's due to some action. We have this stinky thing. Another person comes and gives you a smile. They're not random events. Nothing can be random if there's a natural law. They are the fruit of your actions because you saw them. Everything that is good in your life, every bit of virtue, every bit of kind thing, fruit of your past virtue. Every unhappy thing, fruit of your past non-virtue. And the more extreme levels of goodness and the more extreme levels of suffering. And they're the different realms of existence. They're all minds experiencing the fruits of our own positive and negative actions. We are the boss. We create the entire universe.
Okay, so we create our own naraks and our own demons and our own
and our own happiness and our own joy and God realms and bliss and pure lands and Buddhahood. Yes.
Okay.
We are the creator of them.
Okay.
I think it's good to remember the good things, and the easy one is not so difficult to remember the bad ones, but we love the bad ones first. I've never yet met a person, Elaine, in 45 years has ever said to me, Rabina, why do good things happen? We never bother about them. We're so addicted to the misery, because we all think it's not fair, because we all think someone's done it to us. This is the view of ego, darling. It's very deeply ingrained.
Thank you.
All right, Elaine. Linda.
Thank you, Venerable Rabina.
Good, sweetheart.
So, how is it? I know you said you were raised a Christian.
Yeah.
And then you made a shift. So here I am. I'm 70, born and raised a Christian.
Yep.
And I'm still a Christian. And I'm making this shift.
Yeah.
Because I like the Buddhist philosophy. Good. I've had tragedy in my life.
Yes.
And I have, the attachment and aversion and bad people.
That's right.
I'm a good person. I've done good things. Now, you advised me back in November on something I did. And then it was my birthday in March with this sister and went out to lunch. And she was such a mean person. Yeah. Now, I knew I should have asked your opinion, how to deal with this.
And how did you deal with it? But how did you deal with it?
Terrible.
Oh,
it was
right.
so terrible. It was, now when I spoke to you about her birthday and you said it wasn't about me, it was about her. And I shifted my thought, and it was a wonderful day.
There you go.
So, but I went to this lunch because it was my birthday, she asked me, but I went with a lot of baggage.
Okay, right, I understand. That's
And
okay,
she
Linda.
did,
That's okay.
she
darling.
did an event
Yeah,
prior to that. So here I am with the baggage.
I understand. Darling.
And, you know, I anticipated more baggage.
I
And
understand.
she, you know, it was like the karma was there. She
I know, darling. Jesus is
fulfilled.
very strong with family. But Linda, you're doing okay. And I mean, as for moving from Christianity to Buddhism, it's okay. Don't kind of make it strict like that. Just kind of keep moving in yourself every day, using whatever tools work for you. Don't be too strict about labeling one as a Christian and one as a Buddhist. And you'll move in the direction that you need to go that makes sense to you. Make it very organic. Do you understand, darling?
It's yes, but it is hard when you're the only, say you're the one that has different philosophies and everyone around you.
Oh, I know, no, that's right, exactly. Well, you got to just take it quietly, darling, and you can't force your life to be different. You know, it's okay. Just keep doing your own thinking. Don't have to talk about it to people. Don't tell them about it. Just come to classes, think about it.
That's my problem.
Keep your mouth shut, baby. That's a problem for most of us, Linda. For most of us, darling, I swear, our mouth is the big problem. And
Yes,
and you have just groups like this, and you can talk more to other people who like-minded, you know. But don't expect your sister.
And yes, and this is very similar to, I'm part of a 12-step program.
Oh,
It's
darling, well done.
very,
yes,
it's very similar
right, exactly.
to this, and a 12-step program
Well
is
done.
very similar.
So you find
Compassion.
That's right, darling. Just keep moving, darling. You're doing great, Linda. It's all right. You're doing
Thank you.
great. Thank you, sweetheart.
Thank you, Venerable.
Who else, people? What else, people? Questions? Come on. Anybody? Yes, come on then. Good.
If this lifetime is a result of
Past
karmic
life. Yeah.
seeds, right? And
Yeah,
things
yeah.
built up in a previous life.
Yeah,
And in this life, I'm building up merit and so forth.
exactly. For next.
In this present life,
Yeah.
then I wouldn't have free will.
You see, this is the same question as this one, fatalistic. It's an assumption. It's like saying,
It's already, you know.
no, I know, but see, no, but it's not like that. You see, we assume, because you see, there's an assumption in, well, first of all, I always like to do this. Can we please look at this concept of free will? It's actually coming from Jesus Christ. Now, I love Jesus Christ, but we all say it as if it's some scientific finding. It was actually a teaching directly from Christians. I'm just giving it its location. And God gave us this thing called free will. That's how they talk. So, but that's not, so free will. That's first point where it comes from. Second, it does not fit, therefore, with the Buddhist view, because there's no such concept as a creator. But what do we mean by free volition? Well, the Buddha would say that's an absurd concept. Everything's dependent arising. Free will means an absolute that at any given moment you have a choice to do this or that. That's plain nonsense. Check the last time you got angry. Check the last time you got anxious. Did you sit there going, I've got free will and I have decided to be depressed? I don't think so. It was circumstances, and you're just driven by your past. Oh, so it's a bit like you've been perfected playing piano. I've got the free will to play C major. Well, honey, you've perfected it. You don't have to choose it anymore. You've programmed yourself. So that's how our habits are. We're programmed from having done them before. That's logical. There's nothing that you can do well now that isn't coming from having practiced it, good or bad, piano or math. That's called cause and effect. So free will is a contradiction in terms. Free means not dependent. Everything is a dependent arising. And it reinforces that you have choice. But we've all theoretically got the choice to not be angry. Theoretically, you can say that as a statement. Everybody theoretically has the ability to stop being angry. But if you have spent 37 years being angry, you might as well say at that moment in time, you have zero choice. but you've still theoretically got the choice because your mind is not set in stone. But your habits are so primordial. If you were perfecting piano and you play Bach perfectly, you could argue you have no choice but to play Bach perfectly because you perfected it. It's dependent arising. So you theoretically, everybody has the point is Buddha says everyone's got Buddha nature. But as to the conditions and environment that enable you to practice it, that's another discussion. You might have the best potential to be the best musician on the planet, but if you never meet a Steinway piano, you're useless. It's a dependent arising. You don't look satisfied. Wait
So
on.
thank you.
Okay. Dependent arising reinforces that we can make choices. But you've got to have the conditions that enable you to make the choice. A choice is dependent upon the right conditions. That's all. So everyone's got a choice, but it's a dependent choice, not a free choice. A free is meaningless. It implies there's no conditions. It implies it's an absolute, which means you could stop being angry anytime you like. And that's clearly not true if you've practiced it for 37 years. I mean, if I'd heard, before I became a Buddhist, if I had heard that it would be good to give up anger, I would have scoffed. You idiots, what are you talking? I thought anger was great. I prided myself on it. So I couldn't have even heard the thought that maybe I could give up anger. But theoretically, I've got the potential. And then when I got the right conditions, then I started to work on it. It's space and time. Every rose seed has the potential to be a rose, but it's dependent on air. If you hold it up in the sky for 37 years, honey, you won't get a rose. It needs dependent conditions. The right place, the right earth, the right time, the right water. It's a dependent arising. Nothing sits on its own. Nothing exists as an island. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes.
I think you answered it.
Okay.
But it's something about what you asked.
Yeah.
I think I'm equating choice and free will to mean the same thing.
But I just wouldn't use the word free will because it means a misnomer. Free means not dependent. It's a Christian view, and that's nothing wrong with it, but it just doesn't come, it doesn't fit with this view. It's no one's giving you anything. It's a bizarre idea. But we just assume it's all true.
So,
whatever we mean by it, I'm not even sure.
So we've been angry for 37 years.
What, darling?
And so we've been angry for 37 years, and then we start to say, gosh, I'm so tired of being angry. I'm going to see if there's a way to be.
And that proves it's a dependent arising, which means, but I mean, but many people, look at the world. Look at the world. Many people are happily keep getting angry and being righteous about it.
Right. So that's not free will, but that would be.
That's just because of habit. It's habit. No, it's all habit.
To change it though, to have the thought.
If the thought is, okay, if the thought is there, at some point when I heard the Buddhist teachings, my mind was ready to hear something I could not have heard a week before.
Okay.
So then the conditions of my ability to be not angry started to ripen, that then enabled me to hear it. If I could never hear, it's good to be not angry. If that tendency to not be angry weren't in my mind, I could never not be angry. Like you tell a lion to stop eating the buffalo for breakfast, she does not have a possible chance in hell because the habits are so primordial and she cannot possibly access any of her other habits. But look at humans, forget poor old lions. When habits are that strong, you can't even see an option, but nevertheless, that person has still got Buddha nature. And nevertheless, at some point, that person will be able to hear the opposite, but at this moment in time, not possible. So free will implies at any given moment, you can suddenly change. That's bizarre. It's just not rational. Do you understand?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Probably really silly.
No, come on, darling. Don't say it.
If the brain is not the mind.
Yeah.
It's just the brain. Where does the mind hang out?
The mind, okay, the Buddhist view in the Vajrayana, this is not like we think at all. Consciousness is not physical, okay? So right now, our consciousness is like stuck in this body, definitely. And we can't see past our own nose. We can't see the past or the future because we're stuck at the very gross level. So consciousness is cognition. And in the Buddhist view, it is pervading your entire body, going through these 72,000 subtle channels, inextricably linked to all their own sets of the wind energy, which is why the doctor can feel your wind and knows it's connected to your attachment or your anger or your this, your that. So this is the mind is pervading the body, connected to the body. And it's connected to the brain as well. Of course it is. So the brain is a physical indicator, I'd put it that way, of what's going on in the mind at a grosser level. It's a good, and that's not insulting neuroscientists. And I think it's interesting about the mind. Hang on. I find this a really example we all know. You know, if you can't see it or taste it or touch it or smell it, we can feel the evidence of the mind. You can walk into a room where two people have been fighting and they're totally silent. We know we can cut it with a knife. You can feel the anger, and it's not physical. You can feel it, and you can feel people who are joyful. You walk into a place that feels sweet. That proves we can feel the presence of mind that is not just physical, you know. Do you understand what I mean? It's interesting, isn't it? And that's eventually we'll get real subtle intuition. You literally, as you get more subtle in this concentration technique, your mind has gone beyond the conceptual and the sensory, so it can literally see the past and the future and the minds of others exactly. That fits completely with the Buddhist view, you know. So interesting. It's time to go home or somewhere, to the jazz club maybe. Eileen, talk to me. Eileen's got a hand up. Yes, sweetie pie. Better unmute, babe. Unmute. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Well
The contents of the mind create these habits, right? They're habitual.
Sure.
And so the contents of my mind are going to create certain tendencies and propensities.
Exactly.
Is
They
that
are,
what?
they are in fact tendencies. The mental states are in fact tendencies.
Yes.
And we're trying to just reconfigure them all and program and develop new tendencies. We'll strengthen our positive tendencies and lessen our negative tendencies. That's really what we're doing in the mind. The states of mind are tendencies, exactly and literally that.
And that's what takes rebirth.
The consciousness itself, if you like, takes rebirth with those tendencies implanted in them. Yeah. It's a very subtle level of mind that leaves the body. As you go through the death process, the grosser level ceases, the sensory ceases, the gross expression of all the emotion ceases, and you get to this very subtle level of consciousness, which is holding all the karmic imprints. And then due to the karma that was triggered and you died, you program to go to the next mummy when she hops into bed with the daddy, you know, and you run there like a magnet and hop in and off you go, a new person. Depending on the shape and color, you might be a lion, you might be a dog, might be a narak, depending on the habits that manifest. So we better be on the case and develop nice,
really and truly, yeah,
and grow nice seeds in the ground so we get another decent human mummy when we die. I mean, this is the way they talk. It sounds hilarious to say that we can be in charge of it, but we're in charge of it. I mean, we're not really, but we can try.
Yes. You
understand? That's why Thomas Open says, walk how to face death without fear. He says, if you want to help anybody in this life, they need you most at the time of death. They finish this life, you've got to help them navigate this process between this one and the next one, help them die peacefully and virtuously. Then it'll trigger a virtuous karmic seed, and then you'll get a nice new human mummy and off you go. Yeah.
Thank you.
Next life, babe.
Yes. Yeah.
Aren't we?
I'm hoping that all of us studying Buddhism seriously will take it with us. That's what I'm counting
Of course
on.
you will.
I won't forget.
Relax. Of course you will. It's not going to disappear. So just keep practicing, sweetheart. Keep practicing virtue and goodness and confidence and kindness and love and compassion, and kick anger and attachment out the door. Tell them to go away. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Time to go, Gus. Over to you. Next week. Now you can start with the details. I've just done the raving on. All right.
Okay, you set the bar very low for me.
Okay, good. Okay, darling people, thank you so much. What today is Wednesday, isn't it? Tomorrow, what's the plan tomorrow, Sheila?
Tomorrow we do Dharma office hours.
Oh, people to see. Oh, no teaching. Okay, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay. And then Friday and Saturday, Sunday, we've got more about the mind. We're going to rub our noses in the details over the weekend. Okay. Attachment, anger, jealousy, pride, and the root one, ignorance. Yeah, we'll show. These are the main ones to know about, I tell you. It's kind of like seemingly simple, but it's kind of profound. We'll go through them. And I can only tell you about them because guess why? I know them really well. Isn't it? And when we know our own, we can know everybody else's. We have a bit of empathy. Linda, darling, one more question, Linda. Talk to me, sweetheart.
No, you know who's been waiting? That will be Layla.
Who?
Layla.
Where's Layla?
She's
Are you there? I can't see you. Oh, good, Layla. I didn't see you, darling. You talk to me, Layla.
That's okay. I feel ambivalent about asking this question, but I'll ask it anyway. it's so eliminating non-virtuous states of mind and cultivating virtuous states of mind is beneficial and can lead to equanimity and happiness and eventually elevating all of us. And we've had since beginningless time to do it. And yet it seems that very few people have.
I agree, darling. I agree with you. I agree. What to say? Maybe it just tells us
Is it
how
just
hard.
because it's hard? It's harder than
I think that's
molding
the only
our mind
conclusion.
into.
It has to be the only conclusion, Leila, that it shows how hard it is to. No, you see, no. It's even interesting. You know, single point of concentration, which is so astonishing, you can be forgiven for thinking you're already enlightened. It's so amazing, some of the qualities. The Buddha would say we've had it in countless lifetimes, but we haven't used it to realize emptiness. We can even lose bodhicitta, Leila, at a certain point. So we just got to keep plodding, keep going, just keep knowing. It is hard, it is deep, it is long-term, but it's logical that we've got the potential. So that should just keep us going. Have confidence in the law of cause and effect. That's all we can do, I think. I agree with your point.
Thank you.
That's why it sounds so ridiculous. You know, it just sounds ridiculous, beginningless lives. It sounds ridiculous. I agree with you. I agree. So meanwhile, focus on now, isn't it? Thank you, Leila. Okay, people, we think we've been here this 2 hours. If it's any made sense, try and use any of the tools. You don't have to call yourself a Buddhist. That's not relevant. It's just practical. And keep moving one step at a time with confidence in ourselves, confidence in our potential. And to see the world, I think a good way to practice the wisdom wing and the compassion wing. The good way to practice the wisdom wing is to look at the world and see, look at the suffering, look at the nightmares, look at the misery, look at the horrible people, and then say, thank you for showing me how to not to be, instead of criticizing. That's a really good way to feel better, because the world is full of garbage. So thank you for showing me how not to be. That's how I do with Mr. Trump. I mean, look at the Washington Post had all these Pinocchios, you know, they checked on every single lie. They gave him a certain number of Pinocchios for every lie he told over the 8 years or 4 years he was there, right? So with Mr. Trump, I'd use that example. I'd say that he's a liar, he's a cheat, he's this, he's got hubris, he's arrogant, not to mention having ugly hair, whatever you like, you know, it doesn't matter, depends on your taste. And I'd go, there it is, I check that, there's ugly, there's lying, there's this, there's that. Then I'd go, two things I'd say. Thank you for showing me how not to be. And then I'd say, or the first one I'd say is, I recognize that. Then you don't get angry. I mean, it's not easy, but you try. Then you learn from it and you bring it right back to yourself, instead of as if you're a saint and everybody else is evil, which is what we love to do. And then the compassion wing is, then what can I do to help? That's how, and then you stay stable in your life, because it's the anger and the despair and the criticizing and that makes us exhausted, because this is the way the world is. It's like we're just living in denial. We can't stand to see the way the world is. But if you say, this is the delusions, look at them. I've got these too. Thank you for showing me how not to be. Then you have courage, you keep working, and you feel connected to others, and then you try to have compassion, and just one day at a time. That's what I try to do. John Trup Semcho, Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam, Ke Guchi, Ke Panyampa, Mepa Yang, Gong Ne, Gong Du Pavasha. So maybe this bodhicitta, this amazing attitude of wanting to benefit others, may it grow and grow in the hearts of all, and just keep moving one step at a time. Thank you, people. So kind. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you.